For myself, I found a great deal of inspiration and wisdom by reading these passages, and they can be excellent tools for exploring the inner mysteries and contemplating the universe. Spirit Mysteries recently published a new edition of the Emerald Tablets, made to be easily legible to the modern reader. For the original publication is like, "Hark now and hear ye, and thou thine own inner flame shall be lit." It can be a bit hard to follow, so you'll find links in the comments to go and get a free download today. The Emerald Tablets describe a number of different things, from wisdom teachings to ancient history. In a nutshell, Thoth describes the beauty and majesty of Atlantis, a bright and vibrant home for the people who lived there. He goes on to describe the degeneration of the hearts of the Atlanteans, which led to their downfall and the Great Cataclysm. He said that Atlantis fell because there were those who were too proud of their knowledge and dared to enter the halls of Amenti in order to get greater knowledge, kind of a lust for power moment that created the cataclysm. This could be referring to the Martians building the synthetic Merkaba with forbidden powers. He also said that the few who survived did so by using a spaceship which today is buried beneath the Sphinx. This is a concept we explored much more thoroughly in the original Human History movie. Throughout the Emerald Tablets, he also describes a great deal of wisdom which we can use to evolve our consciousness. We highly recommend you go and read these passages for yourself if you haven't. For now though, let's stay on the subject of history because we have one more account of this pre-flood period of time to look at. Now, the Book of Enoch is one of the most ancient religious texts we have available to us today, with influence extending into the New Testament, even despite it not being considered biblical canon. The text appears to date back to about 300 to 200 BCE, so we must establish that it is younger than the Sumerian texts. The Book of Enoch describes a story from the perspective of Enoch, who was the great-grandfather of Noah, who lived for 365 years up until the Great Flood wiped out most of humanity. The story details accounts of the Nephilim and the Watchers. As we previously discussed, the Nephilim are described as the children of the Anunnaki and human women together. Since the Book of Enoch describes that the Nephilim were the offspring of the Watchers and human women, we can easily link the Watchers to being the same as the Anunnaki. It's for this reason the Book of Enoch is so valuable to us in deciphering our past, because it provides one of the few clear links between the ancient Sumerian tablets and the stories we find in the Bible today. But because this book concerns itself so heavily with the events of the Nephilim and the Anunnaki, or the Watchers, you can probably imagine why they decided to omit this from the biblical canon. Some believe that these giants may have been the reason for the Great Flood, as they were seen to be unnatural and harmful to the human race. In the Book of Enoch, it describes that these Nephilim, known also as giants, multiply in numbers and grow to the point that humanity can no longer provide enough resources for themselves. With food shortages, the giants then began consuming humans and other animals. The Book of Enoch also tells us that many of the Watchers, such as Azazel specifically, were responsible for teaching humans the art of warfare and how to construct weapons and other harmful devices. And for the sake of correlation, this is also reflected in the Emerald Tablets, speaking to the degeneration of the human consciousness. Now, the events of this book are rather long, and we're not going to get into all the details right now, but the story essentially culminates in the Great Flood wiping out humanity with only a few surviving humans, which is where Noah and the Ark come in. As for Enoch himself, he is taken into heaven by God in a fiery chariot, which is believed in some circles to actually be describing a spaceship that took him away to live somewhere else, maybe on another planet. Now, as we bring this segment to a close, there is one more theory out there pertaining to our original story that I must share. According to Sitchin, you know how Marduk was related to a planet in the earlier stories? Well, in later Sumerian tellings, he also seems to act with very personal and human-like characteristics. And Sitchin believed that the name Marduk, used to describe a planet in some texts, was also used to describe a specific being, just like Enki. He believed that Marduk was stationed on Mars at one point, but came to Earth to invoke his authority and rulership over the world. This may even correlate to the Martian theory we covered before. This might be just a fanciful long shot, but is it possible that all of these stories connect and Atlantis fell because the Martians were actually a specific group of Anunnaki led by Marduk, who came to the Earth and bred with human women, creating deformed people and caused certain groups of humans to pursue dark magic, effectively changing the evolution of humanity, leading to this great cataclysm and fallen consciousness? Could it be? Obviously, all of this is just an idea. We cannot say definitively heads or tails what happened, but the connections here are definitely fun to explore nonetheless. How about you? What do you think happened? Make sure to let us know in the comments of this video. Now, this story is not over yet. We still have at least one more massive anomaly we have to look at. The point in history when all of these stories line up with each other, the Great Flood. Speaking of stories of ancient floods, most of us are undoubtedly familiar with the legend of Noah's Ark, a story in the Bible which describes how, at one point, an ark was built by Yahweh's chosen person, who in the Bible is known as Noah. However, the character of Noah was most definitely inspired by, based on, or perhaps even translated from a much older tradition of flood myths that had been in circulation for thousands of years before the writings of Genesis. If we look to older writings, we find very similar stories written about in at least 3 different versions from the Mesopotamians alone. These older Noahs are known as Ziusudra, Utnapishtim, and Atrahasis respectively, each being a part of their own story, expanding upon one another and giving us a fuller picture of the whole narrative. In the 19th century, Assyriologist George Smith translated the first Babylonian account of the Great Flood, which sparked great interest in the topic, as many believed at the time that the text acted as external proof of the events of Genesis. Consequently, countless other so-called flood myths were unearthed and eventually translated. The most well-known of the flood myths of Mesopotamia are found in a few sources: the Akkadian Atrahasis epic from 1800 BC, the Eridu Genesis and the Sumerian king lists featuring Ziusudra as the last human king before the deluge, and finally, the Epic of Gilgamesh around 700 BC featuring Utnapishtim, which is largely regarded as being the closest in structure to our story of Noah in Genesis. Now, each tale is slightly different, given that each writer wanted to emphasize different aspects of the stories, but the overall narrative is mostly the same. In the Epic of Ziusudra, we begin with the creation of the world and humans, but the middle section is unfortunately lost, with the final fragment telling us that the gods have decided to destroy the world. In this version, we don't know why the flood is being sent, but Enki proceeds to warn Ziusudra to build an ark to help survive the deluge. In the later Epic of Gilgamesh, we learn that the Anuna Enlil sent the storms because humans had become too noisy, which could be speaking to humanity growing out of control. In this rendition of the tale, the Noah character, Utnapishtim, is then tasked by Enki to abandon his worldly possessions and create a giant ship to be called a preserver of life. It's very interesting then to see how much earlier established myths and even gods were incorporated into the narrative of the Old Testament under the guise of Yahweh or Adonai. In each of the ancient tellings, the ark builder was tasked with bringing his wife, family, and relatives along with the craftsmen of his village, baby animals, and grains, because a great flood was coming and would wipe out all of the life that was not on the ship. What's particularly interesting to us concerning this flood myth is that a great deal of historical and geological information shows us that this was an actual event which possibly took place between roughly 13,000 and 8,000 years ago, when the ice caps rapidly began to melt and flood the earth, wiping out a great deal of life and drastically changing the landscape. We can actually see this in our history today. Even a quote from Live Science states, "About 13,000 years ago, more than 3/4 of the large Ice Age animals, including woolly mammoths, mastodons, saber-toothed tigers, and giant bears, died out. Scientists have debated for years over the cause of the extinction, with both of the major hypotheses, human overhunting and climate change, being insufficient to account for the mega die-off." That said, there is still considerable debate over when a deluge event occurred.